Hey everybody, this is M.E. Thomas. I'm here with WeiWei, T Pocket RT. We're going to be talking about Better Call Saul, but first we're going to answer the question I always ask, which is what is it like to be you? And I will start actually this time. So I will say, what is it like to be me? This is something I've been thinking about this morning. It takes me a really long time to get right with the world. I wonder what
Mm.
I wonder what that's about. Like I get so annoyed at the beginning of the day, and at the end of the day I can't hardly like do stuff until like noon. I just have to kind of like piece life together. Otherwise, I'm like super annoyed at like the fly that's flying around or like tripping over something. I'll be like so annoyed. And then I'll like kind of reconnect with whatever it is that I'm interested in that
Mhm.
day, and then get caught up in something, and then get in that flow or whatever. But it's like it's kind of like I love to swim, but I don't like to get in the water.
Oh
I
yeah,
Yeah,
don't.
yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
cold.
that's a
And
great
those
Yeah.
one.
first couple laps are really bad. But then
Yeah.
yeah, once you start, then it can it's just gonna get better or something. So I'm excited to be with you guys though. Let's start. I'll go in my counterclockwise. So let's start with you, Wei Wei. What is it like to be you?
Hey, Emmy. Well, for the record, you seem very happy and agreeable to us this morning, so we can't tell. But actually, I'm just gonna riff off what you're saying. I'm 100% in alignment with the slow starter thing. I mean, I don't get my ass going till noon. That is a guarantee. That's been true all my life. I also like procrastinate to the last possible second. I can't, it's like my starter's broken. It's not there. And I think that this is something that has been common all my life. Also, the thing about every day you wake up and you're like a new person. Like every day I wake up and it's like there's no continuity. That's been true all my life. Like it's almost like if I have friends or a partner or family or a job, like for those first hours when I wake up, none of that shit's real to me. That's just maybe something I saw on TV. So every day I wake up with same thing. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just in this haze. And I remember one of the first times I talked to you like a couple years ago, and you kind of were like, "Oh yeah, me too." And then you said, "You know what? Like, screw it. I just take my time in the morning. I wake up and I sit there and I stare at the wall and I wait for what I need to do to just descend upon me." And I've started doing that, and that shit's like changed my life. So that's one of the ways in which I really enjoy participating in this group, because I find it like, oh, we all have this in common. Oh yeah, we're just gonna live this way, and no apologies and no like self criticism, and it just helps. So that's kind of what I got right now.
All right, love it. Tea pocket.
What it's like to be me as T Pocket. Similar to what you two were saying, I'm a very slow starter in the morning. I just hit my alarm until the last second, and then I'm rushing to get to work, usually doing
Mhm.
100 plus just to get there on time, if not a little late, anyways. Uh, I recently got back into car sales. I was able to,
Cool.
I guess, wheeze my way back into the dealership as I no called, no showed almost a year ago to quit.
And they still took your ass back.
So I used some charm and got back in there.
Yep.
Um,
Well, good salesman.
if I'm
Good
not
save.
working, I tend to just wait for the day to descend on me, but
Yep.
it usually never does, so I just end up doing nothing all day. So I kind of enjoy at least around noon to 2 o'clock. I get some energy,
Yep.
and then I'm just tired the rest of the day.
Yeah, what is
Pretty
with the 2 o'clock is like that's when I can count on it happening. I try to get it sometimes at like 11:30, noon, 12:31. Try to really be like, come on, 1:30. But then it
like
often doesn't happen till 2, and then I can keep going until about like 8 or 9 or something and just do like absolute anything, once it gets going. But
like today I was supposed to clean my Corvette as it's just been sitting outside and getting dirty, but I don't have any way to keep it clean, so I don't
Mm.
see the point in actually cleaning it.
Yeah.
and I don't necessarily like doing mundane tasks, even though they need done. So I'll maybe try again next week because I just didn't feel like doing it today.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it is.
Okay,
And
RT.
that's pretty much me.
First of all, T-Pog, you got a great voice. You should do voiceovers.
That's true.
Yeah, a good voice
Thank
for
you.
radio. It's very sort of, here we are on WXB 225. So, what's it like being me? Well, I'm from similar. I'm very unmotivated. Since that's like my wife's a very dynamic person, so she does loads of stuff, volunteer and all that. So she kind of drags me along. I mean, to make a joke, all our friends, I'm kind of like a plus one. I never join anything. She just joins it, and I go along as a plus one. So that's really what I do. I mean, I do have days where I'm quite energetic, and other days where I don't do anything. But I'm very much externally motivated. I mean, if she wasn't there, I wouldn't do anything for ages. And then I sort of build up to something. But then if I get involved in something, like recently I've been doing amateur theatre, the local theatre got involved. And I went in there, and within 3 shows, I was doing stage management for their Hever Castle because I didn't find it difficult. And also the people there, they say like either you're backstage, front of house, and I can do all of it. It doesn't really bother me. So I can do anything, even a bit of the acting joining in there. So of course they think this is really great and amazing, and to
That's
me it's not a problem. But I think it's because, but then the real actors, the real people who do it, you watch them. That's why I like watching them do it, because they do rehearsals where everyone just mills about, gets in the right space, picks up the right thing, and then the director goes, right, we've done that, we're off book, we stop the script. Now everybody start acting, and they all change into these characters, which I find interesting because that's pretty much what I do all the time.
Oh, sure.
No, the default is, like I said, echo whatever's around me. I never get pushed around as such, but I can just agree with something I don't agree with just to move things along because I don't think the fight's worth having. So
Yeah.
I mean that's pretty much what I do. I kind of cruise, but I'm definitely on life's plus ones. I just other people do things and I kind of follow along.
Yeah.
Resonate a lot with that. I never really take the initiative to do things myself, but if other people want to, you know, haggle me enough to join them, I don't see it as a problem. I'm just kind of a
Yeah.
plus one there.
Yeah, point at me and pull the trigger and off I go. So yeah. And I can be quite sociable when I get to parties. Like you were saying about training and swim, the same. I never want to go, but when I get there, I'm like the life and soul. But it's the initial turning up. I can never really want to go. Don't know why.
There's like an Anthony Bourdain quote. I'll just butcher it real quick here, paraphrase it, where he says, that, R.I.P. Anthony Bourdain, where he says that there's like a guy inside of him that just wants to smoke weed and cereal and watch cartoons all day, and that he spends every day trying to trick that guy, avoid him, like
very
whatever,
much.
so he can finally get stuff done. And I feel like that when I have the morning demon is what I'm gonna start calling
Well, my wife's the way
this
people
version of
say,
me.
what, yeah, they say, what did you do? And I go, did he sit all day in front of the telly watching TV? And I'm kind of famous for that now. If they don't come and get me, I'll just kind of sit. It doesn't bother me. I quite like it. Binge watch whole TV shows, and I'm quite happy doing that.
Yeah.
Somebody can't kill 'em.
Sitting on the couch smoking weed all day. I was definitely that person, and for the past 6 months or whatever, I was living with my roommate, and I would wake up in the morning, sit on the porch, light a cigarette, light a bowl, listen to music, and she would leave at work at 9, and I would be there, and she'd come back at 3, and I'd be sitting there, and I feel like it kind of drove her crazy a little bit, like, why this bitch don't do anything? She just sits here smoking, and in the end, I moved out of her house because of mutual accord. We were both giving each other the vapors. Those were her words, not mine. And I feel like a lot of that was because she couldn't handle just having my presence in the house, just there. And then there's like a coffee shop in the town I live in, and I will just live there for hours also. And the owner has decided that I am like the mascot, and every now and again he'll like throw ice cream cones at me and shit. Because I will just sit there.
What is giving people the vapors? That's the first time I've heard that.
It
Oh,
sounds
it's
like
kind
from the Victorian age, isn't it? Where people
Yep.
used to be upset and make it was
Yep.
just nebulous.
pretty well, kind of like pretty like exactly like the Victorian era, like you know the older ladies, and they would get upset and then they would like faint, and you'd have to give them the smelling salts, and it was like
Yeah, so she just and it was usually
basically
because
I
it's
was
processed time.
massively getting on her nerves and possibly even disturbing her peace of mind. And then I moved out. She's all like, "Oh, I finally am able to have a good night's sleep." And she didn't like stay because I
That's
moved
nice.
out, and possibly she didn't even consciously think it was because I moved out. But there's a part of me that's like, "Thanks, bitch." You know?
She was exactly pulling her punches, wasn't she?
Oh my god.
You know,
But
it is
yeah.
interesting though, like sometimes I kind of recognize that too, where I'm like, there's something that's like bothering me about this situation. Like I am not sleeping well, or there's something where it just feels like something's off.
Mm.
And in this situation, it was just you.
Right,
guess.
right. Yeah. That's pretty weird.
You guys ready to talk about Better Call Saul? So somebody asked, they said, can you talk about Jimmy McGill, the character in Better Call Saul? And this person said, some people think that the character Jimmy McGill is a sociopath or a psychopath. And others say, no, he can't be because he's always doing things for his family and friends. And, he does these other things that they think, are inconsistent with being a psychopath. But here's kind of a funny thing. While you think about this, I always love to get people's their questions like, oh, that's inconsistent. I love to hear people what they think is like the telltale sign that somebody's not a psychopath. I recently got one in a Reddit AMA that was, some people say that you can't be a psychopath, that I can't be a psychopath because I'm Mormon, and that must mean since I'm Mormon, then that's I grew up in privilege.
What? Fucking idiots. Okay.
And so I can't be a psychopath. And I was like, I don't mean to make fun of it. I just think it's so interesting because you just live in your own world thinking, your own thoughts or whatever. Then you hear somebody else's thoughts like this. And I thought that's so interesting to hear that people
I've heard
associate
that
Mormonism with
before.
privilege. That was like the opposite when I was growing up. If you were like from a Mormon family, you had like 6 other kids in your family, and like you never had
Yeah,
money for clothes, you're
most
always just wearing hand-me-downs.
most
You're
religions are
like,
quite humble, aren't they? So it's a bit odd. But then
I bet
I
it's
didn't
because most
argue
Mormons
with
are
somebody
white.
about that thing.
I bet that's what that is.
oh,
Most
about the
Mormons are
whiteness.
white. Yeah, I think it's
Oh
white.
yeah, possible.
Therefore privilege. I really think that's what it is, because out there it is so fucking white out there. I mean, I don't know. When I first came to the US, I spent some time in Washington State, and Mormon, clearly, who is Mormon? White people. I really think that's all that's about.
It's
Okay.
interesting you should say that. Coming from Scotland, we don't have a lot of minorities, so our poor people like me looked exactly the same as our rich people. But yeah, I mean, like the other one is interesting when you say about the psychopath. I had someone who said, well, so put it this way, when you see a chef on the TV or in a movie, there are lots of people who are chefs that aren't consistent with that viewpoint. I've known chefs at high end who don't run about swearing at people and throwing pots and pans. Some of them are perfectly rational, easygoing people. The trouble is people's viewpoint of any even neurotypical people, tends to be formed by the culture the fiction ran. Most people's idea of psychopathy is Psycho, for a start. Hannibal Lecter. I mean, some psychopaths are quite stupid. Well, not all criminal geniuses, but people tend to think, also, it's like a badge of honor. I never understood that. Because I remember someone was saying about your book, they said, yeah, but look at this bit and this bit. That person can't be a psychopath if they do that. I says, they're not automatons. I mean, what do you think this is? Because also, you're seeing what the person's writing down. They're trying to be honest about emotions they had a long time ago. So it's not always easy to remember exactly how you felt. because you
Not
might
even
be thinking, if someone asked you what you were like when you were 11,
yeah.
you're looking now from your adult self at when you were younger, and what you thought then would be something completely different. Like people say, why did you act out at a certain age? You don't know. You maybe didn't even know then. So there is a lot of that, and there is a kind of almost like it's a status symbol now, like being a goth,
Well, that's true.
some
Yeah.
kind of group you've joined or some, and also,
Vampire.
yeah, I love
Yeah.
their clubs. These people are mad as hat. I'd love to be a real vampire and go to vampire clubs. That'd be such fun. But yeah, there's a
What I
lot of
yeah.
that. So and
Well, what
also
I
there's a kind of blame, isn't there? We've become a kind of everybody in the city is a psychopath. That's why the world's falling to pieces. No, it's not. It's because there's a lot of greedy people doing greedy stuff. Some of them are things, some of them are other things. But this idea that of the villain of the piece, like if that person's the group's the responsible for everything. And then you'll get the groupies, you'll get people who walk about doing things deliberately so people think they're psychopaths. And I remember casually saying to some guy in a bar, you do realize that that's not what people do. If people are going to kill you or stab you, they tend to do it. They don't tend to narrate it. So there's a lot of that. I think that's what, and as to Saul, Jimmy, I think he is because of those things. He's a very realistic sociopathic character because he's not entirely crazy. He does care what his brother thinks. He does care about impressing his family in certain ways. He is impulsive and not particularly strong conscience.
Yeah.
But I think he's a realistic portrayal, which is why people don't recognize it, because everything's so fanciful.
So your position, RT, is Saul Goodman is a psychopath.
Yes, I think he would be diagnosed if he went to therapy, yeah. However, I think he would be savable. And then the fact that he's not overtly violent. And interestingly enough, he lived in a very violent world. But he was not one of the main characters that indulged in the brutal violence. In fact, in Breaking Bad, the sympathetic character was far more aggressive and dangerous, particularly near the end, than
Oh
he
yeah.
ever was. So I think it's very much a realistic portrayal. But yeah, definitely, I would say clinically he would be. Yeah.
WeiWei.
Oh yeah, I would tend to agree with RT. I think I would dial it back though to just the definition, like what is psychopathy anyway? I mean, to be honest, there's a part of me that I almost kind of don't necessarily believe in the idea of psychopathy, and I certainly don't believe it in regards to myself, but I feel a very specific resonance with all you guys and with Saul Goodman. He's kind of my power animal in some way. Like the other person who I weirdly feel like my power animal is that chick from Killing Eve. Like sometimes I just watch that and I'm like, yeah, I don't know, but it's like in a subjective way, because obviously I'm not whatever, but so I could say that I have trouble with that word. For me, like when you talk about what do people think about psychopathy, and I always go back to like in the early mid-teens, like all these sites became really popular, like Love Fraud or Psychopath Free, and I remember like running into these sites back in the day and reading it. I was like, who are all these people? Like, what is this whole thing happening? And then what I concluded from studying all that material is, well, one thing is it made me start talking to all of you, because I was like, this is interesting. This sounds weirdly relevant to my life in a disturbing way. But the other thing I noticed is there's a whole bunch of people out there who are failures at relationship because of their own codependency and fantasy issues. And those are the ones who both financially benefited from these psychopath-free love fraud sites. And the image that they promulgated is that there are these evil succubi psychopaths who have no feelings, and everything they do, it's almost like it's like psychopathic people are, or personality disorder are like this weird virus, this weird AI entity whose only purpose is to crush, isolate, crush, kill, and destroy poor innocent neurotypicals. And then you read through this crap and it's like the neurotypicals people sound like total twats. And anyway, so to me, that definition, by that definition, our friend Saul is not a psychopath or has no right to consider himself that. But then again, neither do us, and neither does Jimmy Fallon. And who does that leave? The people at the penitentiary? I don't know. So I guess my roundabout way of saying, I feel a resonance with this guy. I feel a resonance with all of y'all. Does that make him that thing? Maybe, maybe not. But I definitely feel a resonance, I guess.
Yeah, just to clarify, I think you don't mean Jimmy Fallon, the night show, whatever
I keep
host.
doing that shit.
Well, maybe you do.
Or you could.
What's that guy's name?
James Fallon, yeah, but yeah, I'm just
American
it's the
guy.
same name. I just want to be clear for people who are like, hold it, what? Jimmy Fallon.
Yeah, you'll start a meme. Poor old Jimmy.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And
I don't know,
T-Pocket.
game show. I don't know.
So I think that Saul is a psychopath. He doesn't have a real deep connection emotionally to anyone. I mean, he does have a soft spot for Kim and his brother, but other than that, he's not very connected to much people. He does one thing, I think it was season 4 maybe, that him and Kim Wexler were just having fun games against
Oh
what was
yeah.
his name? Against Howard Hamlin. They just made his life difficult for no reason. They set him up to lose his employment by making it look like he was doing drugs just to have something fun to do because everything else was mundane. And at the end of the show, when he was basically hiding from the feds, once an opportunity fell in his lap that he could have fun again, he took full stride in it, and he ended up getting caught. And some of his narcissism kind of showed, and he was more proud to be caught as one of the top guys in the case against Walter White.
Yeah, he
So
did he did want to be the top
I
guy.
really
Didn't he?
think
Didn't
that
want
he's
to
a
be caught as
psychopath,
well.
and maybe not what is portrayed in media, but one of the better real life representations.
What was that you were saying, RT, about him getting caught? Spoilers, I
Yeah,
guess.
he had to, yeah, we'll avoid those. But when he was looking like he was going to get caught, as he said, but he didn't want to get caught as some kind of minor little fish so they can get the big fish. He wanted to be the big fish that they were getting little fish for. Even though he technically wasn't, he still wanted to set things up that way. So it looked like, particularly to people he knew, that he was somehow one of the movers and shakers. And that was, even though he was facing a larger sentence for it, that was important to him that people saw him as that. Because even in Breaking Bad, he was always kind of on the fringes and touching into things. But at the same time, he wanted to be called. That was his thing. He had, well, the chances he took and the risk he took to himself in his career. But it was all because when this came out and the story was told, he wanted to be one of the prime characters. So that was a motivation for him.
Well, do you think it's kind of interesting, T-Pocket, you say that this is narcissism, and I listening to, I'm like, would I kind of, just self-reflecting, would I make that same choice? I think I wouldn't necessarily be interested or concerned of being perceived as the big whatever mover shaker, but just that I would be concerned that people, like let's say some of his friends are like, "Oh, he was stupid." He like gave up his whole life of freedom, just to be somebody's lackey, to be like lower on the the totem pole. And if that were true, I might be like, I don't, I am invested in that. I don't want people for whatever reason to think that I was just somebody's like bitch the whole time.
Yeah. Self motivation is important. Yeah. And people know that, not part of the crowd. I don't like being that, and I don't think he did. And that's why he took some of the chances he did, because I remember he was getting to the end of his rope by this time. He's thinking of what he's going to do, because he was running out of options as well. So there was coming a point where, and there was a good chance he wasn't going to make it out alive, let alone in jail. So he's thinking, what do I want to do? So when you're at that point in your life, things may condense a bit. And his way of thinking would, I think, drive him to think, that's what I'm going to do. I mean, like a lot of powerful people do that. Politicians and people, they're obsessed with what they think is their legacy. They think people care once they're gone, that anyone cares. We don't. But they want to think history's going to write that I was XYZ, which is a strange thing when you think about it, because invariably nobody cares. If you're in the middle of a crisis with the guy in charge now, then you care. Once this history, all
Yeah.
these endless things they do, like, oh, we're going to go back over what happened with this politician or that pop star, and are the Kardashians the greatest evil in the world, and all this. And you kind of think, well, what? Who cares now? You know, they've done what they've done, and they are what they are. And history, as far as I can see, will write it down, or it won't. So that kind of attachment I struggle with. I don't know what it is they get out of that. It's like when they say, I don't watch quiz shows where people win millions of pounds, because the only people I want to win millions of pounds are me. So,
Yeah.
so that's, I think, is the complexity as well, and also where you are. Because if you're at the beginning of your life, you've got a different view of it, and if you're at the end, like, particularly if you don't have an anchor like a religious belief, if you don't have a cornerstone that transcends your time on earth, then you will bounce around and be caught up, and strange things might become more important, because the only thing you've got to think about is what you appear to other people before you disappear. So I think that certain people with belief, and Saul possessed, no, I mean, he was technically Jewish, but he had no real religious background as such. So I think that's an interesting point as well, which again made him more realistic. He wasn't an automaton. He didn't start off in the first day of the season he comes into Breaking Bad through to the end of Call Saul as the same person. He did evolve in certain ways, not to the extent some people might have done, but he certainly wasn't unaffected by what happened in his life. And that's another fallacy people seem to have, that some psychopaths have got, and they'll always do the same thing, and they'll always want to steal or kill, or whereas in my experience, it's more to do for something, very much for people. We do things for a reason, even if it's an emotional one. We're never driven by, like, I don't think we'd ever join a cult. I might run a cult, but I don't think I'll ever join one. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's what I got from. That's why I think he was very real. And I don't know enough about. I always want to look into the writers of the show. I'd like to talk to one of them and ask their opinion, what they think, or the actor himself. How was he playing the character? Did he think
Oh,
he
that is.
was very typical? Yeah, that
What
would
if
be
anyone
good. Thing.
said anything? Like in the media, the writers have been interviewed about this. That would be interesting.
Because he was a
Has
strong
anyone
character. I mean, he started off as a support character in a very, very successful show, and ended up getting a spin-off, which is, so people obviously found him a fascinating, and he was a fascinating character. He was a very interesting person.
seen?
T Pocket, what do you have any thoughts about like this idea about whether that's in character, like narcissistic, like to kind of
Oh yeah,
like
why would the narcissism? I'm curious about that too, because I would not experience him as narcissistic at all.
I wouldn't say that he's a narcissist, but I would say part of, I don't know, I guess just narcissism would be to kind of want to be the one of the top guys in the case rather than being, you know,
Well, he
someone's
wanted to be he
bitch.
wanted to be the top
I find
lawyer, but
that
he
I
wouldn't
find that to be a
study
little
law, would he?
narcissistic.
Yeah, because he did believe himself to be willing. He believed himself to be this wonderful lawyer, better than trying to be like his brother. But at the same
And
time, he
and
wouldn't put
also
the hours
like
in to study the law the way his brother did. So
Yeah.
there was that as well.
and his house that he built was he had a big picture of himself in it, and everything was like gold covered and
Mm.
perfect luxury.
That must be a
Yeah.
secret
Like
I
a
didn't
king.
get there yet.
We all like the good life. Yeah, I must admit, I think that might be an American thing. I don't know, but or we do it. The aristocrats do it here. But having pictures of yourself in your house is kind of like oil paintings of you standing there with a pocket watch or something, trying to portray this image of yourself. That's kind of weird because
Like a dictator.
people really see it in you. Yeah, that's kind of odd. But it used to be a thing. People used to do it all the time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I
But
found
that
that.
oh, go ahead, WeiWei.
No, I was thinking about how he became a lawyer or whatever. I actually found that motivation fairly congruent with some kind of psychopathic what have you, because from what I could tell, he wanted to be a lawyer. And honestly, when I saw it, like I thought his main motivation was to get with Kim. That's what I thought. That's what that felt like to me. Like the whole purpose of being a lawyer was to get with this chick, and that there was like a vestigial motivation to like show up his brother or bond with it, like even like maybe even like I know I've been in this before where like there's somebody I want to get to know and I want to bond with them, so then I do all the shit they do, and next thing you know, I'm running for student council or playing in a band, and I had no intention of doing that. Had I not met like Freddie, I would never have been doing that shit, kind of thing. And that's what that felt like to me. So that does seem to me like a psychopathic motivation to practice the law.
Yeah, to his own way. Yeah, it's interesting.
And so I looked up, I like read Wikipedia a little bit about the show this morning, but I think, and you mentioned this RT, he didn't really study the law like his brother
He
did.
didn't do it. No, he wouldn't go to the same line, which I thought that was very telling because he was bright enough, like his brother. But his brother focused to become a lawyer. Like the way we said, his motivation for being a lawyer was probably less focused. It was to be like his brother and also to try and get him with this girl. So it was never pure. Plus, like I said, he wouldn't put the time in. He was too impulsive.
Yeah, the
He could
most
have done.
expedient way
I mean, he was
possible.
a good barrister, as we call it. He was a good lawyer when you put him in front of a judge. He was a good performer, but he wouldn't, look at other cases and study every single law of every state he was in. So half the time he was bending the rules because he didn't know what they were. So that kind of thing is very typical. Yeah, and he
Yeah,
did look up to his brother, though. He did admire how his brother did it, but it was kind of like he knew himself he could never do that. He could never focus that way and be that way.
well, I mean, that's a question. Like, are psychopathic people capable of admiring or looking up to other people? Because I feel like the collective idea.
That's an interesting one. Heroes is a strange one because it does. I think Emma Watson's great, but I don't know whether my motivation there is that pure. So I think that, yeah. So I think, but yeah, but I don't. I see what you mean. I don't know if we do because sometimes, like I always thought, there's a great line in Harry Potter where Dumbledore, the guy goes, "I'm going back to Azkaban prison. I'll be welcomed as a hero." And he said, "I've never really had much time for heroes," and it always struck a chord with me that because I remember when like in the doing military and stuff, they hate heroes because they get people killed. Someone's brave enough to run through a minefield and shoot 20 people and duck behind a tree.
That's
There's all
interesting.
those bullets firing at him might hit some other person who's not as quick in their feet. So in some ways, now, I wouldn't say that. I don't know if that's cynicism or what it is, but I don't tend to have heroes. I like people's behavior or things they do, but I don't necessarily impart that. But by the same token, I don't have many villains either. I don't see, like I mentioned, the Cardassians earlier. I don't see them as particularly any worse than anybody else in their industry. They're just playing the same game, aren't they? They're not doing anything anybody else isn't doing. I mean, an example of that is you've seen about Russell Brand. Have you read anything about him? He's a sort of celebrity in the UK, and he was making all kinds of money. He was very famous in the 80s, 90s, marrying movie stars, all of this. And then he went a bit off the boil. So he joined all these sort of conspiracy stuff, and he joined all that, all that fringe stuff, which meant he no longer had the protection of the organizations that used to make a lot of money out of him. So now he's facing accusations of sexual impropriety. And of course, it's all coming out of the woodwork now, and they're all joining in. But I thought, yeah, but he was doing this when you guys were there, and you didn't do anything because you were making money out of him. So of all the people who could take a moral stance, it's not you guys. You know, all these women must have come to you and said, this guy's doing this. Yeah. And then it'll all be pushed under the rug because this guy was raking in millions of dollars for them. So I think in that respect, I don't think we've any heroes because tend to see people through a slightly jaded eye, and that we don't. I mean, there may be heroes, I don't know. I mean, there may be great men. There's people like Nelson Mandela, people like that, who went through terrible traumas and still came out trying to pull people together and trying to people. And then there's people who are great religious leaders have done great things to help people en masse. So I don't know, but to me, I don't think we do. It could be narcissistic as well. We don't really like raising people above ourselves. I like people to be about shoulder high, and then and then there's always like I want to be kind of better than it. I don't like to. It's difficult to phrase. I don't like to dominate people, but I can't really be the lowest rung. It kind of annoys me. Even in things I'm useless at, like anything, like I can't play an instrument or sing, but I do like to sing along to things, and I don't, as long as I'm not the worst, which is pretty pathetic, really. So that I suppose that's kind of narcissistic, isn't it? I find that hard though. Like charm, I've said before, isn't all charm superficial? Isn't that what it means? People charm people by saying what they want to see. Charisma, that's another interesting thing. People have charisma. I've seen that. That's a fascinating thing. Neurotypical people really go for that. And I can see it, but it's like seeing a color. I don't necessarily have to react to it. But I've seen people walk onto stages and just whole swathes of people be mesmerized by them. Like Taylor Swift at the moment. She can do no wrong. She could commit murder on the stage and they'd all say she didn't do it. But that kind of thing, I find that fascinating because I don't really fall for that. So that I find interesting.
I felt that same way about Barack Obama when he was starting to get popular. I was like, how is this guy so popular? And I'll
Oh,
tell
yeah.
you my own kind of weird experience with that. So when I was in law school, I lived in Chicago in the South Side, and I got a advertisement that was like for this local politician, and it's like, reelect me, your local politician. And I looked at like the whatever, stats of this person, the background, and I thought, community organizer. What does that even mean? And I was like,
Exactly.
only in
That's
corrupt Chicago would they elect this person who has no qualifications to
yeah,
be
no thing, no nothing.
whatever.
Look at
And
them.
like just
No,
a couple years later, he became the president. I was like, okay.
see, that's the kind of grid. But then I
So
suppose in some ways it's like the opposite. I mean, uh, look at poor old Biden. He's not a bad guy. He's doing his best. But let's face it, if he wasn't the anti-Trump, he'd never have got there, would he? Because sometimes people are looking for the opposite of something else.
Hmm.
I mean, like I know a lot of people who fall for things like Donald Trump. I mean, to me, he's transparent as his hair. I've no idea, but people genuinely, but even people in UK, people genuinely buy into all that. I am the greatest thing in the world, and the people do buy it. Maybe there's a certain security in people like that because they for all their flaws, they don't vacillate. They pick a trail and they just go for it, and they don't care what's in the way. And I suppose some people drive some security from that. But as I say, that might be a control. I never like giving up control, so that could be a thing there as well, which is, I suppose, largely driven by insecurity. But then some of these negatives are positives, aren't they? Sometimes being insecure makes you careful. Being afraid of something makes you wary of what it is. Being
that's true.
confident of something. So in some ways it can be good. I mean, I've never seen that. I was talking about in therapy. I'd never got that polarizing of emotions where they say this is a bad emotion. And if you do this too much, you'll get sick. and this is a good emotion. If you do this, you can fly. And that never worked for me because I don't think emotions are binary. I think that they swivel, and I don't think certain reactions at certain times can be considered negative or positive. I think the polarization or polarity of emotions is a bad thing. But then maybe I don't feel them as intense as other people. Maybe it's easy for me to say that because, I'm not swept up in them that often.
Any thoughts on that, anybody? I have two thoughts from RT you mentioned earlier. I think it's interesting, so everybody think about them maybe if you can. Like, do you have a hero? Is there somebody that you would see as the same way that Jimmy McGill would think of his kind of brother in terms of like, oh, okay, like, and then the second one is this idea that you mentioned, RT, which is are you okay being on the lowest rung?
Yeah.
You feel okay? I'll start kind of with the lowest rung. So I mostly there's a story about Mitt Romney, who is a Mormon American politician.
I know Martin.
Oh, I remember that dude.
Yeah, who a story of he had broken his arm, and he, like, in Mormon land, and this is like good to know, guys. If you ever move, you need to move, and you don't want to pay movers. If you can just ask your Mormon friend.
They'll help you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like this Mormon mover society, almost like they're a side business. So he shows up to one of these moves, Mitt Romney does, but his arm's broken, but he's just using one arm thing. So he's like bringing out, like, small appliances, or the blender, the whatever, pillows, because he has a broken arm. And that always struck me, like, and they were like, isn't that great that he still showed up to this move with a broken arm? And I think, is that the best use of Mitt Romney's time, though? Can he just pay
No,
someone
not
with two
really.
arms to show up?
Honestly,
I think his
brother is
constituents
a
might have a
politician,
feeling about
right? He's a politician, and his constituents love that shit. So honestly, it probably is
Yeah.
absolutely the best use of his time, like token community.
Why do they love it, though? I guess because, like, I hear it and I'm kind of like, I don't know. I'm not saying it's a yes or a no for me, but it is kind of like I often feel that way when I'm on the lowest rung of the ladder. Is because I had a job at the zoo, during college, during a summer in college, in which I was doing food service, but I was so bad at everything else, like cashier, interacting with people, that they demoted me to the dishes.
Oh no.
So I was just back there, like, doing these, like, industrial, like, dishwashers, like, stacking these huge trays or whatever, and just, like, soaking in dish juice, like, the whole time or whatever. And I kind of thought, but is this the best use of my time? I felt like Mitt Romney with the one arm thing, where I thought, I don't kind of mind doing this, but is there something better for me to
Also, there's
do?
kind of a thing like he's doing that. Everybody knows there's something better he could be doing. I am more impressed by the person who isn't famous, who the Mormon people say come along, and he comes and does his bit, and nobody notices he can only move a chair. That would be something admirable. But he's probably being fair to admit he is trying to live up to the obligations and tenets of his faith. I mean, if he didn't do it, he would get a load of flack from his enemies because they say he's not being a proper Mormon as well. So it's kind of a tricky position when you're part of a religion and you're a politician, because you get judged more harshly than the cynical louses that people expect nothing from.
I kind of want to speak to this thing about being the lowest rung. One of my life struggles, I guess, is that I always aspire to be the person on the lowest rung, because that way people leave me to cut alone and I can do whatever I want. And when things go bad, it's not my fault.
That's true. That's clever.
Paragraph.
Yeah.
And the
avoiding responsibility, I can go along with that.
And also, like, I am so hyper aware of a certain personality, and I'm sure people like Mitt Romney and Obama would fall under this rubric, like, that are so invested in appearing good, noble, useful to society, community oriented. And there's a part of me that has, like, some kind of, I guess, contempt for that, because I'm like, it's kind of like what Emi says. Is that really the best use of your time, to convince a bunch of randos that you're, like, the best person or whatever? All you're really doing is giving yourself more work, more stress, more anxiety, 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 more stress, more anxiety more responsibility, more hassle. Why would you choose that? But I'm seeing that is actually really biting me in the ass. I'm trying to perform and I don't show up for performances. Like, like actually show up, like be there. And you know what I mean by show up? We like, I can't do it. Like I just always, even if I'm on stage, me and just 3 other people, and I am supposed to be there, participating and having a stage presence and really being present and all eyes look at me and all that. And I can't do it. Like, I can't do it. Like it's not even stage fright. It's this disinclination I have to rise above mediocrity, I guess. Like I've just become very comfortable. And of course that is bad for me because anyway, that's my thoughts on that.
I suppose some people may be genuine though. We have to be careful of cynicism because
sure.
that's why I rely on my wife a lot, because more neurotypical people do see that some people genuinely are trying to do the right thing and make the world a better place, even though they have to live in it. It's the difficult is we can't see them for the love of us, we just can't, because we're going to look at someone and think, what's Mitt up to? Why is he doing this? Or we look at Obama and think, what did he do? And then we look at and it kind of fits in. And let's face it, politicians don't make it hard. They're always doing something untoward. But there are genuine people out there who probably are just like community leaders. Mentioned them. There's a lot of people during pandemic. They organized things. They got food together. They got medical supplies. They did. My wife would drive around and pick up people for the health service and genuinely do things to try and help other people in a time of crisis or community spirit. And
it's true.
These people, as far as I could see, were genuine. But because I couldn't tell the difference between them and the ones who aren't, I have to err on the side of caution.
It's exactly
I wouldn't,
I get along better now. I just have it in my head like a thing. This person really profoundly cares about this thing. And it basically kind of makes them die inside a little if this thing is not preserved or respected. And that's when I then have to go in and make an effort to be less irreverent or less insensitive about whatever it is, because you're right.
Yeah. People
in some fathomable way, they really fucking care. And it's like, whoa.
Just as well they do, because, we break the planet, we're all in trouble, really.
Exactly. That's one thing that I actually since I didn't watch that much of Better Call Saul, but did watch Breaking Bad. That's one thing I noticed about the Saul Goodman character is he's kind of cynical in this way in which he's not kind of really judgmental. It's more like he just kind of what you guys were saying, he doesn't necessarily buy into the idea that people are being sincere necessarily. He kind of like, it's not.
Well, even in Saul, even the law itself, he doesn't necessarily think the law is the best way to look after people. He says something like that on the episode. He does it to achieve the end, but he doesn't see it like, some people see the law as this is the law of the land and it's noble, like the Constitution was given by God, whereas Saul sees it as, a bit of paper. It's a guideline, try and do this. So he doesn't see it as maybe that's why he never achieved the heights of his brother, because he knows his brother does. His brother sees the law as the pinnacle of human achievement and the reason why we don't, we'll get anywhere, somehow inherently noble. And I don't think Saul sees it as inherent, doesn't see anything as inherently noble.
Well, like at the end of
that as well.
You see that play out when, I don't know, spoiler alert, I don't know what we're doing about spoilers, but at the end of season 4, when he was trying to get himself reinstated and he failed because, according to the people interviewing him, he wasn't being sincere and he just could not get it through his head. Like, if that's a really good example of why people would consider him to have this condition.
Yes, even though
he said, I planned for it. I tried to push all their buttons. I did everything. I explained it to the best that I could. And this woman asked the question, what does the law mean to you? And he just, like, his eyes glazed over and he's like, and you could tell on his brain, he's like, what does that have to do with anything? We're just here to
exactly.
and practice the law
yeah.
and do stuff. We're not here to sit around navel gazing about what the law means to me. And it completely like floored him. And yeah, so that's the thing. What is the inherent meaning or purpose? Like the Chuck guy, clearly he had a lot of meaning, purpose, devotion to the law as a concept. And one of the reasons that Chuck, I guess, hated on his brother so much is that Chuck understood that what Jimmy's investment and devotion was at best skin deep. And one of the things that I think is interesting that we need to bring up here in this conversation is in one of the seasons, Charles said, you know, Jimmy, he means well, he really tries well, but even when he is trying his best, he always messes things up because he just doesn't understand some fundamental things about human nature. I'm kind of paraphrasing. And then he said something like, he's been that way since he was a child. He's been that way since practically he was born. And hey, that's one of the things they say about this, you know, disorder or whatever you want to call it, that you're like born with it, that for some reason, ever since you were a child, it's like, oh no, he's different, she's different. Yeah, no matter what he or she tries, it kind of goes to shit and all this stuff. And so that, to me, back to the question, is he that? Then, you know, there's evidence, like he was like this since he was a kid, nobody knows why, and there you go.
Yeah.
Very good.
Wait, Tea Pocket, real quick, I muted you because I feel like for when WeiWei talks, it kind of like feedbacks through your stuff, but just so you know, just unmute yourself when you're ready to talk. Okay.
Gotcha.
No problem. And then yeah, this idea of kind of just like not understanding. So I read in Wikipedia that somebody, I think it was actually the actor, characterized himself. He was like, why is this actor of Jimmy McGill, Saul Goodman, so popular? So popular that they did a spinoff. And he kind of suggested that it was because all these people are doing these bad things. And so is Saul Goodman. But Saul Goodman's not a hypocrite about it. You know, he's just kind of like sees you know, I wouldn't even say sees things how they are, but just has like this very cynical view of like, I'm doing this for these reasons, these selfish motivations. You're doing this for these selfish motivations, you know, and it's almost like he treats the other characters a little bit like with kid gloves, like they're divas. Like sometimes I experience this in music a little bit where you get like somebody who's like, they need to have their ego fluffed a particular way.
Exactly.
Not just in music too, but I guess in, you know, other situations where you feel like you have to kind of like maybe kind of a Kardashian thing where you have to, since you keep bringing them up, RT, you have to kind of like reinforce their self-illusion in order for them to kind of function, you know, and people are invested in that because you need their participation in this particular way. You know, they're going to sing in this concert, or they're going to, you know, help you promote you or whatever. But
they're not psychopaths, but they invented one called the Kardashian, an entity that was a group thing, and it is a psychopathic entity. Well, I like to see your point that's quite fun, where people say, I did bad things, but for the right reasons. You say, well, someone does bad things for the right or wrong reasons. Doesn't actually make a difference. You're still doing bad things. But there's a lot of that, and especially in Breaking Bad.
Oh yeah, Breaking Bad.
You've got a good enough excuse to do what you do. It isn't as bad as just doing it, which is strange, really, when you think about it. Whereas Saul's character, he just was himself, and he didn't pretend he was doing this for any more noble reason than anybody else, which is, I think, people find kind of refreshing, because, you know, if you do bad things, you've got to embrace it. What with the main character in Breaking Bad, you understand why he did, to avoid spoilers, but we know he had a very good reason for getting into the world he got into. But the reason he had and the people he hurt, it kind of got stretched at the end to the part
totally.
He basically, have you ever seen, enough problem should watch is Westworld touches on this. Because in Westworld, they have all these robots that are like people, and you go to this fake Western place and you live out your fantasies. And the reason they're doing it is to collect information, because it shows people who they are. So the main man in Breaking Bad, but at the end of the show, he didn't mutate into a monster. that's who he was. And this situation merely gave him the vehicle to become who he was. He, for his part, would have said to Saul, yeah, but it was all circumstance. If I hadn't been in the position I was in, I'd never have done this. Whereas Saul didn't believe a word of that. He goes, no, you're just like the rest of us, buddy. You're just with us. You're the same as the kid, me, the gangsters. You are one of us. You're not some guy who was sucked in and hypnotized. And that to me was fascinating because the chap involved was highly motivated, but he was neurotypical. And like a lot of people that, he did some pretty brutal things. So I find that quite interesting as well. The fact that if your character's got a good enough excuse for what they do, people don't question your nature. You didn't do it because you're a psychopath. You did it because circumstances forced you into it.
So you think
So
that
there's an element of that.
normal people look at Walter White and they're like, yeah, he's just a good guy who was put in bad circumstances.
Certainly
Oh,
initially, yeah. I mean, not with
abs-
the later seasons when he went completely, but certainly in the early seasons, yeah, people genuinely thought he was a noble person who
oh
was
yeah.
doing the best thing for his family in extreme circumstances. But
Wow.
then typical people fight wars. It's, they're perfectly capable of hellish acts of brutality.
I mean,
Are the
it's
people firing rockets at Ukraine? Are these psychopaths? Probably not. So,
yeah.
yeah, I do think at the beginning he was painted as a kind of anti-hero. And maybe that's how they see Saul, because he never directly hurts people. He doesn't start out to cause problems like his brother said, or actually do damage to people. He tends to be relatively sensibly motivated. Like if he's fighting for his survival, he'll do what he has to do to survive, but he won't go nuts. He wouldn't destroy whole groups of people or, you know, kill someone for no good reason. So in that respect, is a balanced character and a more realistic one. I mean, that was the success of Breaking Bad, and no matter how bad people get, you could still see the person inside what they were doing. Where they weren't just turned into complete monsters. Like the ultimate thing I think for neurotypical people are zombie movies, because then they get to hack people's heads off and shoot them in the head with all kinds of weapons and utensils and whatever they got in the kitchen, and everybody thinks that's fine because the person's already dead.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting.
mm.
Wait, you had a thought about that?
Yes. I very much what RT said. The light bulb went off, and this is why Walter White is a sympathetic character to most people, and why Saul is kind of liked as an oddity and considered psychopathic. Walter White is basically that's all chicken feelings. That's all that is. His
It
entire
is chicken feelings, and that's why I was like, "Oh my gosh, I
Gangster.
can't." He's killing people because of his chicken feelings. You guys
Yep.
don't see that?
He's a
Yep.
gangster. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
like
and
those gangster movies where they're always very
motivation
religious.
is to protect his family and to give them food. And you know how many Americans are in the predicament where they are, according to them, doing the best they can. They have their little school job and they made all the right decisions. And it's this resentment born of self-righteousness. And yet here I am, and I don't have a pot to piss in, and I have this baby, and we're broke, and here's all these bad people making all this money, and now I have this cancer. Well, that's the last straw. I'm going to show all of them. And so, fuck, all those people who love Breaking Bad identified with Walter White.
Oh,
It's
I
like a
see.
huge, it's a huge
That's
fantasy.
interesting. I
Because they
never
did what they
connected
think
that.
they'll do that. Yeah, they
Totally.
had to get this into it. But it's
Whereas
like
Saul is just like, he's just himself. He's just this fish who will thrive in whatever weird ocean he finds himself in. Even if the ocean is super toxic, he'll find a way. But not Walter White, man. And when what's his name tells Walter White, "You're just like us," it's kind of like the emperor has no clothes. But then it also goes back to that we always talk about here, the identity thing. Well,
What's the identity thing that's you're thinking of?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we always talk about in this Discord or whatever, and one of the ideas that has really like transformed my life in some way is about identity and who are you and what do you want? What's your intrinsic motivation? And then most humans, and even us to some extent, if we care to, identify with something, and that just, and it's somehow for some reason it's like good to have an identity. It's good to know where your morals are. It's good to know what you're good at. It's good to know. It's just, I don't know, like for some reason, it helps people to have an identity. And I have gone my whole like 44 years without much of an identity and without caring to. And now I've been working on it. And so I kind of understand what that's about a little more. But when Saul told, what's his name? Walter White, that thing, that was an identity hit. He was attacking Walter White's identity. Because Walter's identity was, I'm just a good, hardworking man trying to get on, and I found myself here because life sucks. And then Saul was like, no, you have an erroneous conception of your identity. You're as bad as the rest of us.
Well, have you watched it backwards? Have you seen people to watch later episodes of Breaking Bad and go backwards? They would see Walter White as a drug dealing gangster.
That is true.
That's what he was. He was running a drug ring. He was gangster. People got violent. He got violent back. That's a pretty typical view people have of drug dealers. So if they watched it backwards, they would see him as less sympathetic, because they would, like I said, if you've got a good enough excuse, people seem to let you off with everything.
Yeah.
So that was the interesting about identity. And Saul was right. He was, in my view, his identity always was that he was he was confronted with Walter got a series of bad situation and the circumstances to deal with. And whether he knows it or not, he chose to deal with it by becoming Scarface. He didn't look for help. He didn't try and get other people involved. He didn't try and find some way to use his skills to help the drug situation and use his time that way. He decided to use it as a vehicle to solve his problem. Like every person who deals drugs in the world, whether they feel justified or not, they're doing it because they're trying to achieve whatever they're trying to achieve. But the idea of Walter is he was desperate to cling on to this nobility, whereas Saul never, like you said, he never that much of a hypocrite. He never painted himself as the victim of anything. He just saw the circumstances in front of him, dealt with them. And he admitted he made mistakes. And when he made mistakes, he tried to get out of it. Okay, he tried to get out of it by blaming other people, but hey, you use what you got. But yes, it was a fascinating season. But that always struck me, because I always thought that. I think, where do you draw the line? Like, wars are a great example of that. The Ukrainians were clearly in the right when the Russians invaded them. But now they're blowing people up and they're killing people. So whereas these things, I think, I always get fuzzy on this. So who's got the moral high ground now? If you're fighting for survival, you're fighting for survival. I think that's inherently noble. That's fine. But you can't really claim the objective moral high ground when you're also killing people. You know, when you start becoming the aggressor, when you start, using sophisticated technology from the West to send robots to blow up ships, the people on those ships might be perfectly innocent Russians or even people from other countries who aren't firing rockets at you. So they become your collateral damage. So that I think is where it becomes complex. I think morality is an area that is very fuzzy to us, and I think it's fuzzy to neurotypical people, but they just don't seem to accept that it is. They feel that they're in the right, and I never really knew what that meant. You can't feel it, you have to think about it.
Yeah, they feel they're in the right, and that's the interesting thing about the Better Call Saul character is that, I see that you want to talk in a second, Tea Pocket. Is that he doesn't seem invested in like this kind of self-image. the way that other characters are. You're right, WeiWei, that like Walt seems like floored, that somebody kind of contradicts like this view of him as being like this noble character. And it's kind of interesting to me that Saul seems to think, okay, it's fine that he feels this way and I can use it in a way, but eventually he kind of just breaks and he's like, you know what, I am just going to tell you about yourself, that's one of my rules. I never do. Never tell people about themselves because they can be so volatile when
Oh,
you
yeah, when
tell
that
them
was
about themselves.
The funny thing is, it's called call Saul when you have to call Saul, and that was his nickname in the show because the very fact that Walt
Saul
had to call
Goodman.
Saul meant he was the kind of person that needed Saul. So he was that kind of person. Otherwise, he would not have needed his services in the first place. So, Saul wasn't working for, councils or individuals dealing with a car insurance. He was working for people in the drug trade, and that meant Walter. So, yeah, the very fact he was standing in front of him meant he couldn't be the character he thought he was.
Yeah.
I personally think that Walter White is a psychopath as well. He kind of used the excuse of his family as motivation, but he was never really emotionally uh, deeply connected with them.
I don't
Once his
remember him ever
family,
asking them, to be honest, did he?
so when his family started pulling away from him, he was more concerned about making money and portraying himself as the, I guess, highest or best drug dealer in his region and having his territory in his own
Like
way.
he was Amway. Yeah, Walter didn't want to be in the bottom rung, did he?
No,
No.
not at all. And he kind of regretted selling his part of the company Gray Matter to start his family when that company ended up doing billions of dollars. And he always had contempt for his partner that never kind of reached out to him to help him out, knowing that he was,
Yeah, he's a bit resentful.
not
Yeah,
nearly as well off as the billion-dollar company owner.
yeah. I think
That's interesting. Like, why would he resent that? Because I remember finding that to be like, when I watched it, I was kind of like, I did not understand his feelings about his partner. Like, he made those choices. Like, he could have made different choices. He made those choices.
Yeah, and his partner might just as well have made mistakes and the business would have collapsed. What would he have felt then? Would he have felt sympathy for him if he pulled out at the right time and his partner ended up in trouble? So yeah, there's a kind of, but everybody's the hero of their own story, aren't they? That's the thing. Nobody's ever.
My
I don't
my
think nobody's
understanding
ever a villain.
is that Walt's work was mainly what drove the company. So his original work and discoveries is what drove the company to be as successful as it was. And his
Yeah,
partner just kind of was more business inept and used Walt's work to grow the business.
but
And
that's common,
Walt,
isn't it? You've
Walt
always
really
got to
wanted
drive
credit
through.
for his work.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I suppose it's just. But then you got to
I
be.
feel a little this way about, do you guys know Marvin Gaye, the musician?
Yes.
Yeah, great musician, love him. But the family of Marvin
Yeah.
Gaye, they are so
Oh,
aggressive
oh,
at
they're
suing people for
terrifying, aren't
copyright
they?
infringement.
Oh God, that's terrifying. Didn't he shoot his kid or something? His dad
Oh
shot him or
yeah,
something.
yeah. Marvin Gaye's dad shot him. That's how he died. Yeah. So his
Right.
family, who, like, are they? I don't even know who or who's in the family or whatever. But they're constantly kind of like trying to get money and credit for things. And I
That's
think
because
that's
Yeah,
because
that,
what?
I was just gonna say that's because the family is identifying with Marvin Gaye and what Marvin Gaye did, because apparently the family has nothing going for themselves, so they're just gonna fabricate their entire identity about what this one dude did 50 years ago or whatever.
yeah, he's
Yeah,
a
so they're
talented
always
man.
claiming people are copying Marvin Gaye songs, and I'm like, well, even if they kind of are copying, Marvin Gaye copied other people, it's just kind of like this weird, you're going to be kind of
And let's face
policing.
it, poor old Marvin doesn't care anymore because
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Daddy
of course.
used a 12 gauge on him, so it kind of makes it a moot argument, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah, but that
So yeah,
reminds
that
me
was
of
terrifying.
the Walt thing where it's like you want to get kind of credit for this, and it's like, okay, yeah, but you've already gotten the thing that you bargained for, like that's the thing that you bargained for, and kind of like you said, if the company had not been successful, then would he think,
Oh,
oh,
very
it's good that
well.
I got out while I could, and
And
it's
maybe
just
the
like,
company wouldn't have been accessible because he would have interfered with decisions. And
mm,
I mean, you can understand why people would feel that way, but at the same time,
I
this
can't.
was always what he gets a lot of excuses, doesn't he? He did everything. I mean, he was motivated. I don't blame him. He did what he needed to do to survive. But it's an honesty. If you're not honest with yourself, then what's the point of any of it? You've got to
That,
be.
yeah.
You've got to sit in a room with yourself and accept who you are. Otherwise, you're
I
never
just
going to find any peace.
I just have a little comment about the whole like this compulsion to receive credit for what you've done. I've always found that rather foolish. I far prefer to be responsible for things or to even make things happen and nobody know that it was me, because that's where true power is. What is it with these people who have to claim credit for what they do? It makes no
Oh,
sense.
I can
See,
do
Saul
that. That's not.
Goodman is that way. Saul Goodman had no problem
I mean,
appearing like completely humble or foolish, or whenever he was in trouble, somebody bigger than him was going to beat him up. He just played along like, oh yeah, I'm a poor defenseless little wretch, and then he got saved. And quite frankly, I've been in those situations in my life where the only way I didn't get killed was because I was like, oh yeah, I'm the helpless, whatever. But people who like really
it
want to claim
works.
credit and who have this like investment identity in being like this powerful hero, those are the people that often get killed because like all the time Saul did that. And then when you compare Walter White and how Walter's White reaction always was to be like big and tough and kill and yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but
Sometimes taking credit's good, especially if you take credit for other people's work, then they tend to have to take the blame for it. So if it goes well, you get the credit. If it goes south, you can always say it was them.
I
So there
do
is
though,
I
like,
suppose ego as well, I suppose.
yeah, I do like this idea though about Jimmy McGill, Saul Goodman not being kind of self-deceptive. It doesn't seem like he has like this self-illusion that he needs inflated constantly by people. And I think it's because he
No, he
sees that as
does.
a vulnerability, which it is. It absolutely is. If you
for
constantly
sure.
require external validation,
Yeah,
or
you don't want to really want to be dependent on other people's opinions to get by, because that way lies madness. Because you're never going to convince all the people all the time. You're always going to have detractors. It's like I find it fascinating this modern debate where you get famous people going on and going. I go on and look at my Instagram, and some people are nice, then some people are really horrible. And you say, yeah, but you don't know either of these people. It's just text on the page, pictures. It can be disturbing if it's pretty brutal, but don't read it. It doesn't really matter. It's the same one with the people who say you're the greatest thing in the world. You don't know who this person is. They could be, sitting there eating a grandma at the same time as typing to you. So it is kind of like, I don't get that. I mean, if you're famous, get somebody else to read it. And if you don't like it, tell them to bin it. I mean, I go online as me, so I get lots of flack from all kinds of people. And I remember arguing with a newspaper because they made a false accusation about Emma, and they got lazy. They cut and pasted from
Emma
another
Watson.
paper. Yeah, they cut and pasted from another paper instead of doing their own research. So I did the research, and I got a retraction. They actually printed the retraction, which was fun. My wife didn't like that though, because I spent like 12 hours or something fighting online with about 18 different people. Yeah, I once argued online with a bunch of they were radical feminists who didn't like trans people. And I didn't like them picking on the trans people. So I had 53 threads at the same time
Wow.
and won all the arguments. See, that kind of thing is just ego. Nobody cares. Somewhere in ether that knows. But I didn't get banned, but I still thought it was fun. But then there can be a kind of, to be honest, people who are extreme have very limited arguments. So you've got like 8 arguments in the 52 threads. So you only have to argue those 8 points and you score all the points because they're all just echoing each other. So extremists are fascinating. You pick an extreme, men's rights groups, feminist groups, right, left. When you get to the fringes, they sound exactly like each other. It's really fascinating. Their arguments are basically the same. So, yeah, but that was toying with the chicken. I got into trouble for that. Jen told me to stop playing with the chicken people.
So,
because I got
wait,
into
wait. You suggested that we talk about Kim Wexler.
yes.
Yes, yes. Yeah. She's very interesting because, I mean, okay, one of the hallmarks of what's his name, Saul, is that he not only like joys in manipulating people, but he basically firmly seems to believe that that is the correct way to deal with human beings, not even for his own aims, but for their own well-being. That was like the whole thing with the old ladies. And the thing about Kim is a hallmark of their relationship is that they're always in collusion to basically fuck other people over. And so here is this woman who one could, due to her behavior, be like, oh, she's got it too. She's whatever, psychopathic in some way. But I just don't think she is. And I haven't been able to figure her out. So I was just curious if anybody had thoughts about her.
I don't think she is. I think she's trying to survive the best she does. She genuinely likes Saul. Because, like I say, of the circle of people they're in, interesting enough, he's the least terrifying. Because he's not dealing with all of his problems with a machete. So, and in that respect, I think she was. I think he did genuinely have feelings for her, and I think she
Sure,
felt
it's possible to be
safe. I
happy.
think with him, and also I think she kind of hid behind him a bit. Remember that thing about doing bad things for good reasons? If it was Saul that was doing all this stuff, she could kind of take a step back and say, "Well, it wasn't really me. He kind of instigated it all, and I could take a step back." So yeah, and I think in a way she was an interesting character though. There was a lot more going on with her than was on the surface. She wasn't stupid, and then she did read people very well, which of course few of the other characters did. So she knew when to step to the side and when to do. But I think there was a genuine connection between the two of them. I think she did genuinely have feelings for him. She was kind of his saving grace in some strange way.
Yeah, and I think he had feelings for her too.
I definitely, oh yeah, definitely did. He definitely had a bond. Yeah, we're not monsters, not robots. You wouldn't be able to do anything with it.
Well, I mean, I assume you do because you're married, and Emmy, you're in a
yeah.
relationship.
I mean, I don't have a lot. I think it's interesting because some people have loads and loads of people they've got loads of connections with. I just find one probably enough.
It's too much.
That's my limit, really. I don't have a broadband. If I was broadband, I have like a modem. I don't have. Yeah. So I think that's a lot to do. They're capable. It's not the same as everybody else, but a lesser extent. Which is why I think it takes a lot of us a long time to realize we are different, because we don't realize other people don't think and feel the same way in certain circumstances we do. So it's interesting.
I wonder if too that is kind of how Saul Goodman is, at least in Breaking Bad, where sometimes I think he's kind of like, at least with Walter, where he's like, clearly that this is who you are. Clearly that this is what's happening, and we're all just kind of pretending or whatever.
Yeah,
And I think he truly is surprised when he finds that Walt is like, in this weird illusion la la land. He's like, how do you not see that you're the same as everybody here?
When Saul's dealing with Walter, he's dealing with him the way would the crook he's trying to get off of prison, the gangster he's working with, the con. He just deals with them as he deals with them. And I think at first he doesn't really notice that Walt sees himself as some kind of white knight. And when it hits him, like you said, he starts to use it. But after a while, he thinks, dude, you really got to take a step back. You're not some extraneous part of this. When I go to my bunch of files, you don't have a special colored folder. You're just one of the guys.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that he's the one to tell him that, because interestingly, I don't think Walter would have taken it from anybody else, because he would have definitely saw them as being ulterior motive or judging him or something. But
And
whereas from Saul, he realized.
Yeah, I agree. Like narratively too, like the only person you could have maybe say that to him is Saul, because Saul is kind of like, as we say, he doesn't have kind of the same weird pushes and pulls of like chicken feelings, or like needing to portray a particular role
No, he
necessarily
just
that
did his
he's
job.
personally attached to. Yeah. And so we do see Saul Goodman, I think, as just this neutral, like chaotic neutral, where he's got his own agenda, sure, but it's not like this overarching agenda to come off a particular way, or to, like this identity kind of focused agenda that a lot of the, Gus Fring too, it's like, is this guy
Yeah,
so
they're all
invested?
painted. Yeah, Gus an interesting character as well. He's another one who kind of uses the victim card. He's young, he's impressionable. Yeah, but he's not. You're a bloody meth dealer. You didn't, you went to the effort of finding somebody who was good at making better meth than you, so you could make a better business. You're not some innocent who wandered in off the street. You just wanted a better product. So, yeah, in that respect, there was a bit of, and that again, at the early part of it was very much framed like, it was almost like Gus was influencing Walter and taking him down the dark path. He's turning them to the dark side. And then you realize that no, Walter's well in there. And when Gus falls behind and things get tough, he pulls him right into the dark with him. So yeah, there is a kind of there must be. I suppose there must be a lack of some way of a social conditioning with all of the characters in there. With Saul, we've just decided it's a clinical psychopathy. With others, people, they've got other configurations or lives or whatever that made them be that way. But in the end, like Saul said, they've all ended up the same. Like I said, if you walk the program from the last episode back, you wouldn't see the characters in the same light as at the beginning. You wouldn't see them as victims. You just see them as fellow gangsters. So, yeah, and I mean, in body count, I think Saul's is probably the lowest compared to all the other people. When things got really bad, things got a bit crazy, didn't they? So later on, but yeah, we'll avoid spoilers. But let's just say people did not make it out alive.
Yeah, but I think that's interesting, because that's one thing that sometimes I get from other people is they say, hey, it's interesting talking to psychopaths because they have a clear vision. Like that's one of the reasons why they like having a friend, or a coworker or whatever who's kind of psychopathic, is
Right.
because they're able to kind of see things a little bit more clearly, like take a step back and be like,
Yeah, clarity of
this,
thought.
yeah, clarity of thought. And I think that's interesting that that's a characteristic of Saul, is that he
Yes.
doesn't quite seem to get caught up in the thing, what's going on, the way that everybody else seems to be caught up. And he too, like when everybody's kind of being, grossly optimistic, he's like, hold it, no. And when
Yeah,
people are
that's the
being
other
like
thing.
grossly pessimistic, he's also
Yeah.
like, no about this. Like he's always kind of the, let's try to see things as they really are instead of thinking with our feelings.
I seen a film recently. I can't remember what it was, and one of the characters, he's a politician, was talking to him, and he goes, "Right, we're going to sort this out." And they're all chatting, and he goes, "Right, okay, enough. Optimism's for children. Let's deal with the problem." And I thought that struck a chord with me. I thought, I've always thought, I mean, it's nice to try and be positive about things, but when people are being deliberately optimistic, it always sounds a bit like, yeah, you're doing the Disney version now. And that's you've got to face up to what is. I mean, everyone wants to avoid some terrible things, but eventually you have to face it. And I
Yeah.
think whether we face it or not, we do see it. We don't. It's not hidden from us. Whatever the trauma, the problem, what's coming.
Yeah.
Whereas it took me a while to realize that some people really can convince themselves that it'll be okay. We got a friend of ours who's moving house, and she's always selling and trying to buy houses, getting it wrong, and a family, people say, why don't they bail her out, the sister, like, even though they've got a bit of money? And they say, because we're only seeing this now. They've been doing this since she's a kid.
Yeah.
She won't listen to their advice, but then when it all goes south, she expects them to bail her out. And I think, well, when is she doing this? Because that's terrible. I said, yeah, but I said to her, I won't say her name, but I said, have you ever bailed anybody out? Everybody went
Yeah.
silent. I said, well, have you ever bailed anybody out? And she just looked at me like I was a Martian. I said, well, why do you expect it from other people when you've never done it? I mean, you must know people who need help. You've never thought, do you think you're so in your own trouble, you can't possibly help them? But you expect other people to juggle their stuff and help you.
Yeah.
One
So
of the
That's
that,
really interesting.
Just one quick, like something RT was saying, one of the backstory, let's explain this character things that showed up in the series was they showed a little flashback to when Saul, or whatever that was his name is, was a child, and his father had this shop. I don't know if y'all remember that. And it was very much like the father was a very sweet, empathetic person, and every time anybody went in there with a sob story, he would just give them free stuff. And in that scene, Jimmy was like, "Dad, how can you do that? This guy is clearly scamming you." And the father was like, "Oh no, Jimmy, blah blah blah." And of course, at the end of his childhood, the father is ruined. And so what the writers of the show want us to believe is that this is why Jimmy became cynical and jaded and rampant self-interest, kind of as a reaction to his father being, I guess, too whatever, empathetic, whatever.
I don't buy into that because
No,
Jimmy
but it's funny
doesn't.
how they
Jimmy
had to
doesn't.
explain it
He
to the
doesn't
people
refuse
so
to
that
help
people would
anyone.
accept the character, you know?
Yeah,
Humans,
I can see where they're going, but I think it's a bit superficial because
no.
his dad probably did a lot of good for a lot of people, and he would also see that. He would see other people benefiting. So even though he'd never be his dad, he wouldn't necessarily go completely the opposite way. And he didn't. I mean, Saul is not overtly violent character. He doesn't look for trouble or cause it indiscriminately. So he's not like he's got stuff. Plus, people like doing that. It's a sort of hangover of psychology, and everybody's always got to have some incredible reason in their life for doing the things they do. I've seen a great example of that. You remember there was a film about Columbine, the shooting there, and it was a big thing, and it was Michael Moore, I think. And we're watching it with a friend who's a social worker. And the scene in it where the kids start shooting is they show a number of kids. One kid's staying at home, his dad drinks too much, he has to help his young sister at school. The other kid's got everything, cars, money, all of that. And anyway, the shooting comes around as this big reveal, and it's the two rich kids that are killing everybody, who were given everything in life. And my friend, the social worker, was genuinely shocked. I said, well, that's the truth of it. I said, we don't know why people do what they do, but we do know these shooters come from all demographics. There's no single point of reference. And you thought the deprived kid, because he came from a rough background, is going to start mowing down his classmates, whereas the guys who've got everything aren't.
Did
So
you see the
obviously,
movie American Psycho?
yeah, that was good. The interesting thing about American
All
Psycho
right.
is you don't know whether it's real or not. I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
When you get to the end of the movie, you don't know whether it's all in his head or not, which I thought was quite interesting. You
No, I
don't
thought
know
it.
whether he actually did all these things or not. That was quite fun.
I feel like in
That was
that movie,
clever.
that guy, American Psycho, the conflict in that guy's mind at the end was when he realized he could literally get away with murder. And I
Yes,
noticed, like, he had kind of a brief spiritual crisis about it for like 5 or 10 minutes in that film. And then at the end of it, he's like, well, fuck it. I guess I can do whatever the fuck I want.
I think that was, like I said, that was an interesting film because I got the impression that a lot of that was in his head and he didn't actually do half of what he thought he did. But it was interesting that he eventually realized. It was also a reflection on the system, wasn't it? The capitalist system in the city. That people can be as cynical as they like and get away with it. So,
you don't think he murdered all those people?
I got the impression at the end of the film, I think it was an element of doubt of how much of it was real and how much of it was fantasy.
What other people?
Clearly he was full of images that were pretty much, crazy. But at the same time, I don't know if he really would get away with it as easily as that. I think there was an element of fantasy to it as he eventually became the person, the corporate shark that he wanted to be. So.
Yeah, I haven't seen this movie WeiWei, but I hear you saying, is that true? But I think I've heard enough about the movie. There's like some question about even his identity. Like, is he the name that he keeps obsessing about, or like
he's an
yeah, there's
unreliable narrator.
yeah, he's an unreliable narrator, sorry, who and that's why they kind of suggest, hey, maybe this is just, like his fantasies, yeah, instead of what actually
His
happened.
American dream, if you like. It was there's a reflection in the American dream, the dark side of it, and that this man was successful despite the fact he was largely motivated by brutal imagery and hurting people. So
that's funny. Literally, that's hilarious.
I know that is funny to me too. Wait, that you took it literally.
Like,
It's
oh yeah, here's
interesting.
do this,
I
don't
probably
do
would have taken it literally too if somebody hadn't, like, you know, what do we say, primed me to
Sure.
think of it that way. But I don't think I have seen it. But let's wrap up a little bit. I'm starting to get like really peckish, hungry. And
Oh.
so final
Yes,
thoughts
breakfast time,
about
dear.
Saul Goodman, Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad, or anything else that we've talked about. Should we go in a little bit of an order? Wait, do you have any final thoughts?
Sorry. No.
No final thoughts. Tea Pocket.
Thing I found interesting is that Gus Fring kind of mirrored Patrick Bateman and American Psycho, where every little thing is in perfect order, not an eyebrow, not a hair out of order.
Yeah,
Everything was
he's really
perfect,
nuts.
very
Yeah,
self-obsessive
he is a
on making
narcissist,
everything
isn't he?
perfect,
Yeah.
which
Hmm.
to me is just unrealistic. I've never met anyone that perfect.
Yeah. That's
I don't know if
interesting.
that
Yeah.
resonates with psychopathy. I don't think so.
Yes. And it's interesting. They almost kind of, what do we say, satirize that in American Psycho. You know, that's thought to be ridiculous,
That,
but
that,
we're
that's
meant to take
interesting.
that as just how Gus is in Breaking Bad.
Yeah, well, I think the point is Gus probably seen American Psycho about 10 times.
Mm-hmm.
He probably
Yeah.
had it on fast forward his whole life.
Mm.
He was obviously an idol. Because
Final
fantasy
thoughts
was.
from you, RT?
I think if anyone asks you about, fictional psychopaths, avoid all the Hannibal Lecters and all that kind of thing, and tell them to watch Saul, watch Breaking Bad, and watch his character, and that'll give them a more rounded idea that there's not a point system, and it's not something you win.
Mm-hmm. Love it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for chatting me. And hopefully people got something out of this. Now I want to watch Better Call Saul more than just the pilot episode with
It's really good, actually. It's very good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it's
my
very,
favorite.
Okay,
very.
I
My
do have
favorite
a
of the
final
series.
thought. Now that I'm not coughing to death, my final thought is I
Oh.
would like to recommend a show from Australia called Wentworth, which is kind of like the
Oh,
Australian Orange is the New Black. And look for the character of Joan Ferguson. If we're doing this psychopath monitoring in media, she is, yeah. So maybe that's what I have to say. Wentworth.
We'll check it out. All right, everybody. Chat
nice.
you later.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Have a good day.